Hello and welcome to the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman. I am joined, as always, by John Kelly. We're going to be talking about UFC Vegas going down. Aaron Till versus Eric Brunson at the Apex this Saturday. We got a 10 fight card on tap, and it doesn't look like the best one in terms of a talent perspective. I think the main event is interesting, but a few betting spots we'll talk about before we get into the card. John, my man, it's been a busy week. We got college football starting today. I got my Joe Burrow shirt on. Shout out to B Cash that Heisman ticket a few years ago. More importantly, in terms of our podcast listeners, we had Dana White's Contender Series start on Tuesday. You cleaned up in those streets. I cleaned up in terms of controversial tweets. But yeah, it was a good week for you. Talk to us a little bit about Contender Series and then just kind of an overview of this weekend's card.
Yeah, good to be back once again. Contender Series off to a good start. For those that don't know, I started doing a new video series on my YouTube at Jon Kelly DFS on my YouTube channel where I break down Contender Series just like we do here, just a lot shorter. And yeah, just check it out if you haven't done so already. Like I said, off to a good start there. And obviously we do have to talk about Jonah's controversial tweet. He was getting a lot of heat from UFC fighters. I mean, Jonah, kind of let's talk about that here for a few minutes before we get into the card, which it looks like I didn't change UFC Vegas 35. So that's on me. This is UFC 36 in the background. That's on me. But yeah, let's talk about your tweet here for a minute.
I mean, I don't really know if there's much to talk about. Like, I had to take Contender Series. I don't blame people for watching fights on Tuesday nights. Like, I've definitely watched the Contender Series before. It's just the idea that all the marketing is behind oh, these are going to be the guys who come in and are going to be winning UFC titles constantly. And that just kind of gets and at this point they make up 25% of the roster. They have a losing record in the UFC. I think Aaron Bronstetter put out a tweet they're less than 10% of the ranked fighters in the UFC, but 25% of the roster. So I was just dropping some facts on the timeline, and people apparently are super defensive about the show, and just started listing off random good names. And most of the people weren't even listing Alex Perez is probably the best fighter off Contender Series. I mean, he literally headlined a pay-per-view, fought for a UFC title. And everyone's name dropping these random ass fighters who have one nice UFC finish and are 1-1 in the promotion as a reason why the show is the greatest thing. And the UFC signed people before the show is a thing. I don't think the show's bad. It's just we're cutting Damian Maia and Jimmy Rivera so we can give these guys who are going to go 1-3 Jerome Rivera or 0-4 and get finished in 10 months a spot. So I was just tweeting about that. I didn't expect it to go viral. It wasn't even supposed to be a hot take. In fact, I like the Contender Series. So we get to fade the guys once they get to the UFC. And that was kind of your point, John, is that's the best part of Contender Series is you get to fade them once they make the big show, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've talked about it on my show. I love the story, the backstory, sometimes sob story, but whatever. I like the story and I buy into the fighters, but let's be honest, in the right situations, they're excellent fade candidates. And I don't know if we have any that fit that bill on this card, but I'm sure we'll talk about it. But yeah, I thought it was funny because your tweet went viral. You had UFC fighters, giving you former Dana White Contender Series contract winner Adrian Yanez was in your mentions about it.
I tweeted Yanez is cool. I'm glad he's part of the roster. But I mean, people forget Kevin Holland didn't win a contract because Dana said he talked too much on the show, and everyone talks oh, Kevin Holland won Fighter of the Year. He didn't even get a contract. Ricky Simone might be one of the best fighters off of that show, and I don't think he got a contract originally either. Brendan Loughnane, who is close to fighting for $1 million in PFL, didn't get a contract off that show. It's just, I don't know. They went from, I thought it was decent when they didn't sign that many guys. Now they signed more fighters than they had fights this weekend. Saw something about an eye poke. I honestly didn't watch any of it. But anyway, those are our 4.5 minutes on the Contender Series. John, anything you want to add before we get into the real, mostly some high level fights going down this weekend at the Apex?
No, I think that pretty much sums it up. We got 10 fight cards, so I'm sure we'll talk about the differences on Draftkings as far as the game theory goes. When it obviously with the 10 fight card, ownership's going to be a lot more condensed, so we're going to have to keep that in mind during roster construction this week. What up, Matty Muse in the chat? What's going on this beautiful Thursday?
Yeah, Manny Muse says Thursday afternoon action. Let's go. Yeah, a little bit earlier show than normal. John was flexible this week, which was very helpful for my personal schedule. Manny Muse says, tell us about the Apex. It was fun, man. It was awesome. It was awesome to be there. I'd never seen fights live, so that was super exciting. In terms of what you were mentioning, John, this week we only have 10 fights scheduled. During the pandemic, we've had a lot of cards. I think the one in 2 weeks headlined by Anthony Smith and Ryan Spann has 15 or 16 fights scheduled currently. I'm sure it will not be that way once fight night rolls around, but we do only have 10 this week, and it's Thursday, the card's finalized, no one else is going to be added at this point. I don't think it changes anything really from a betting point of view. Obviously, it's just less spots to look at. In terms of DFS, something I do, and John, I'll let you touch on this in a second, is in terms of GPPs, things like win equity become more important to me on weeks like this, because when we have 12, 13 fights, you really need to hit the 6 highest scoring fighters to win a GPP. And in order to do that, you always need to do that to win a GPP, but in order to have the 6 highest fighters, you normally need 6 first-round finishes or 6 absolutely dominant performances. We may not get that on a 10-fight slate, because more than half of your DraftKings lineup is going to be – your DraftKings lineup is more than half of the slate, right? We have 10 winners. You have to pick 6 of them for DraftKings. We might not get 6 finishes. We might get 3 finishes and 1 dominant decision. And that kind of makes me like guys – we'll talk about this fight in a second – but like Marc-Andre Barriault. He's not necessarily a finisher. He's not someone who pushes a massive pace in terms of wrestling that I would normally love to target, but I feel more confident about him winning than his DK price tag implies. And those points, just outside of a finishing bonus, but just for winning a fight, kind of become more important, and their magnitude is kind of heightened on fight cards like this with just 10. And obviously ownership is condensed across the board, right? Everyone becomes higher owned. Oftentimes in our Discord, people will be like, oh, I thought this guy wasn't going to be talky and he's 23%. Well, we only have 12 fighters to choose from, and they have to make up 600% ownership. So I just think stuff like that is interesting on slates like this. I just, if you have a flag, plant it, do not hesitate to go super overweight on a guy, because the field as a whole will be higher on every fighter, just in terms of ownership. John, do you have anything to kind of add in terms of general slate strategy, or should we hop into our first out of 10 fights here?
Yeah, I think we can hop into the fights, and then obviously as we're discussing the fights, then we can add to that overall point that you just made as well.
All right, sounds good. Let's do just that. We'll go right now. First fight of the night, we got Jonathan Martinez as a -160 favorite, $8.6 thousand against Marcelo Rojo, making his second UFC appearance. Rojo +140 underdog, currently $7.6 thousand on DraftKings. John, I'll toss this one over to you first, because I saw you did have a bet up in the ftnbets.com bet tracker. We just redid the bet tracker, by the way. It's free for everyone to go check out. So ftnbets.com. John, you have a play on the money line for this fight. Talk to me about who you're backing here and kind of how you see the fight going down.
Yeah, I like the underdog in Rojo here. This is just a spot where, Jonathan Martinez is a guy who I don't think either of us have been super high on. He's been priced as a pretty sizable favorite in the past, most recently against Davey Grant, where he got knocked out. And this is just another spot where I just trust Rojo to be able to pressure him. Martinez doesn't deal well with pressure. He's more of a striker that wants to sit at range. He throws okay volume, but not great. Whereas Rojo, I know, is going to move forward. I know he's going to throw more volume. He's a good boxer. He rips the body, mixes it up very nicely. And I just don't think that Martinez, while he has those nice kicks, I just don't expect him to be winning minutes here in terms of the striking. And then I think Rojo also has the grappling upside as well. He's not like a big time wrestler or anything, but he does mix in the takedowns a little bit. And we know Martinez can't defend takedowns. So I think if anybody is going to land takedowns, I think it comes from Rojo, who I also favor in the striking as well. So I think at a +130 range, I think I got +128 on FanDuel. But if you shop around, you could do a little bit better there. But I think that's a good number on Rojo, who, like I said, thought he had a good showing in his debut fight that he took on short notice. Now he's coming down to his natural weight class in 135. I think he's going to look even better. I think the cardio is going to be fine. He arguably won those first 2 rounds against Charles Jourdain, who we'll talk about later on this card, until he just gassed out in the 3rd round, ended up getting dropped and knocked out himself. But I thought he had a pretty good showing here, and I've just never really been that high on Martinez. And I just trust Rojo to be the more active fighter. And I think this one's kind of going to be back and forth war, because that's sort of the style that Rojo kind of dictates himself. But in that style, I do favor him. Martinez has been dropped multiple times. And then, like I said, coming off the knockout against Davey Grant, who I actually think Rojo is a little bit more dangerous than Grant. So yeah, I like the underdog here, and I think he's a solid play on DraftKings as well.
I definitely don't hate the stab on Rojo myself. I think I'm going to pick Martinez here. You know, historically, I haven't been super high on Martinez. He has decent kicks, but I think the rest of his game just kind of lacks enthusiasm, right? He's super high volume. He's not a great wrestler. His hands aren't great. He's a solid kicker, like I mentioned, but what I prefer playing in this spot, you know, I think these guys are basically going to come out here and kind of just swing until one man falls is kind of my read on this. I think these guys aren't known necessarily as huge hitters. We don't think of Jonathan Martinez, several UFC finishes. Marcelo Rojo obviously has a bunch of finishes on the regional scene. I don't think of these guys necessarily as massive hitters, but what I do think of them as is like these super high paced guys who are just going to come into scrap. Rojo especially, guys like 24 career fights. I think 3 of them have gone to decision. He's not out there to go to decision, and I think he's going to bring us pretty rapid pace on Martinez early. And I think Martinez is a slight cleaner, just kind of kickboxer as a whole, and probably a better grappler as well. But I think the margins are thin, and more than likely, we've seen both of these guys hurt, right? Martinez knocked out by Davey Grant in his last fight. I just think he looked good in that fight, kind of outside of the KO, right? Grant was a big underdog, but it wasn't a situation where it was like, oh, he kind of came back, hit a knockout as a plus 200. It was great, but he was losing into them. Like, I thought Martinez just didn't look great throughout the entirety of the fight. He was also hurt in, I believe it was his UFC debut against Andre Sukumtoth. He was dropped multiple times in that fight. So he's clearly someone who has, you know, shown susceptibility to getting hurt in the past. Rojo is a tough guy, but he got dropped twice in his debut. Jourdain's a bigger fighter. You spoke on that, John, but it's just one of those things where, like, I think they're probably going to swing. We've seen both of them hurt. It's not a read that I have a ton of confidence in, but I did play the under 2.5 in this fight. I got plus 130 on it earlier in the week. Numbers about plus 120 now. I think that's playable for a unit. So yeah, I don't feel super strongly about who's going to win or who get finished, but I do think that, you know, plus 130 indicates that there's a less than 50% chance knockout or a finish happening in the first 12.5 minutes. And personally, I think it's probably greater than 50%. So yeah, I expect these guys to come out and swing, and I'll just take a piece of the under and hope they go to war for me over the course of 12.5 minutes on Saturday night. Actually, check that. It's like Saturday afternoon, just so everyone knows. We'll cover that on the show. Lock, double check what time Lock is here on the show, but I believe Lock is like 1:30 Eastern time in the afternoon this weekend. Oh wow, it's 9:30 Eastern time. Or wait, 1:30. Time zones are really hard. I'll get that situated in a second. But basically, this was supposed to be in London. We're there until headlining it. We have Jack Shore on the card, who's obviously a European fighter, Paddy Pimblett from England. He's making his UFC debut. We have who else is on the card? Molly McCann. So a bunch of European fighters.
Tom Aspinall.
Yeah, a bunch of European fighters are on this card. So I think it's one of those things where, like, they just want to get prime time there. So the fight is earlier for us. I mean, it's an early DK lock, so make sure you get those lineups in. Let's move on to the second fight of the night here, John. We got Marc-Andre Barriault, who's currently a minus 165 favorite over Dalcha. Champion Dalcha Lungiambula comes back plus 145 is the dog here. Marc-Andre Barriault, $8,400 on DK. Dalcha, 7.8K. This is my second bet of the night. I only have 4 plays for this week, and 2 are on the same fight, but 2 of them also come on the first 2 fights of the card here. So I'll go first. I like Marc-Andre Barriault in this spot. I don't really think there's a massive edge left at minus 165. I did take it at minus 150. This line was closer to minus 105 for a bit, so up to those who got it number with me, but I do think I squeezed a little bit of value out of that minus 150 line at BetMGM earlier this week. It's a pretty simple handicap for me. I think Marc-Andre Barriault is just kind of reliable to do more. He's a guy who brings solid pace to pretty much all of his fights. He has good durability. We've seen him, take some shots and be able to continue moving forward. And with Dalcha, it's a situation where, the guy looks like an absolute bodybuilder. He's just a specimen out there. But those muscles, they fill up and they need oxygen, and there's lactic acid buildup when this guy fights. And in terms of his skill set, there's nothing that I really think is super impressive about Dalcha. He doesn't throw too much volume. I think he hits decently hard just because of how strong he is, but I don't think his technique is really good enough so he's hitting you cleanly. He throws all into his punches, but he doesn't really get into a spot where it's like, oh, he really sets up this right hand and then he lands it with a lot of power. So I think that Dalcha's best path is going to be to clinch up here and then probably to wrestle. Dalcha hasn't even had that much success against guys like Daquan Townsend, who was cut from the UFC, is not UFC level. But Daquan Townsend, he landed 8 strikes at distance in that fight. It was mostly clinch work, takedowns for Dalcha. And I think while he might be able to take down Marc-Andre Barriault a little bit in the opening minutes of this fight. You know, Marc-Andre Barriault, we've seen him taken down 5 times by Park before, but something that I think is important to talk about in terms of that fight is Park took him down 5 times, but only had about 3 minutes of top control in that fight. So when Marc-Andre Barriault gets taken down, he works very well, quickly back up to his feet. He doesn't fuck around on the ground. He's playing off his back. His main goal is to get back up. I think that's just going to kind of zap gas tank Dalcha here. So, and I kind of mentioned this off of the top of the show, I'm really valuing guys who I think have a better chance to win than the market does this weekend in terms of DFS. And I think Marc-Andre Barriault is that kind of guy. I think he probably pours on some volume in rounds 2 and round 3 as Dalcha tires. And I'll take him with a late KO here. He's my pick. I bet him, and I think he's a pretty solid play in DK. Even though the price doesn't matter a ton this week, Jack Shore's our most expensive fighter at 9.1. So you don't need to be you don't need to think too much and be too cognizant of how much guys cost. You can kind of play mostly whoever you want. You know, you can't stack the 6 most expensive fighters on the slate, but it's not like we have someone pay up for it 9.5K or anything like that. So that's my breakdown here. I imagine I covered most of it. John, do you agree that Marc-Andre Barriault is the side here as a favorite, or are you taking a shot on Dalcha?
No, I'm definitely not taking a shot on Dalcha here. I'm with you. I think Marc-Andre Barriault is the side. I think he's sort of leveled up, you know, since moving to Sanford MMA. The striking's looked a lot better, but it's really his ability to trust his power and trust his hands lately, because he was in, it's not that he was getting blown out in any of his, what was he, 0-3 in the UFC, his first 3 fights. And it's not that he was getting blown out in those fights. Like, they were mostly competitive fights. It's just he didn't do enough. Like, he seemed timid at times. And now, since the camp change, his striking has looked a lot better, but it's the aggression that I like to see, where he's moving forward. He's trying to knock guys out. Not that he wasn't before, but it just seems like he's leveled up a little bit. Whereas Dalcha on the other side is like a poor man's Tyron Woodley, like super athletic, allegedly has a wrestling background, but doesn't really use it that often. He has power, but doesn't let his hands go at all. So it's like, how can you expect this guy to win minutes here? Like, you can't. He's basically drawing dead to a knockout, in my opinion. And I'm not even sure that the knockout is that likely. I would think that Barriault has more of a chance to win by knockout here. So I like you. I think Barriault's the side here. And I think he's a pretty decent DraftKings play as well, because I think he has the ability to finish. I think he's priced decent, but also, I think just the fight in general, you know, the way the fight plays out, I think it could end in a finish, and I think it comes from the Barriault side. So yeah, I'm with you there. No issues with Marc-Andre Barriault this week.
All right, let's move on to our third fight of the night. Timothy in the chat says Marc-Andre with a GOAT 3rd round finish last time. Yeah, he did get it done for inside the distance bettors, for round 3 prop bettors. He's just a guy who kind of comes on strong towards the end. And John mentioned, like, he went 0-3 in his UFC to begin his UFC career. But I mean, those are not easy fights to take. You know, he wasn't fighting the Abu Azatars of the world in his first 3 fights, right? He fought Andrew Sanchez, Christoph Jocko, and then Jun Young Park. And then he got the Oscar Pajodas of the world, the Abu Azatar. So he probably is just about the type of level, kind of the level fighter who's going to be 500 in the UFC. And ultimately, I just don't think that Dalcha is a 500 fighter in the UFC. That's just kind of what the read comes down to here. So yeah, we're on the boat on the same side there. Similar size in the first fight of the night. Let's move on to our third fight of the night, John. We got Charles Jourdain here, minus 180, $8,900 on DraftKings against Julian Erosa. Comes back, UCJ, plus 155, 7.3K. I believe this is a catchweight fight taking place at 150 pounds this week. So both these guys will get an extra 5 pounds on the scale for weigh-ins tomorrow. This, I think, should be a pretty fun fight. I mean, anyone who's watched Charles Jourdain fight before knows that he throws a lot of output. The flying knees will be there. He's a guy who just kind of is all action during his fights, and we've seen that throughout his UFC career. And you know, we've seen a pretty big price tag next to this guy's name before, where I think people were expecting him to kind of have more success at the UFC level than he has to this point. I believe the only time I bet on Charles Jourdain was against Andre Fili, and he lost a split decision there. With Jourdain, I think he's a pretty solid striker offensively. He's not the most technical guy in the world, but throws a lot of output, kind of spazzy in terms of like just throwing random things, throwing the kitchen sink at his opponent, something's going to land. And then on the other side with Julian Erosa, Erosa is big for the weight class, first of all. So I do think that the extra 5 pounds likely helps him come this weekend. And I think it'll also help him because when we look at Julian Erosa, I mean, this is a guy who he's a decent offensive striker, since the Dana White Contender Series, second time he was on that show. He's had 8 fights in the UFC. 7 of them have ended inside the distance. So when he's winning, he's winning in fashion that usually includes a finish. But he also is a guy who gets finished because he moves forward, he keeps his hands down, his chin straight up in the air, and that leads to just kind of chaos. The one fight that he's had that went to the judges' scorecards was against Grant Dawson, and he spent like 10 minutes on his back in that fight. So basically, if this fight stays standing, I expect both guys to throw a lot. For that reasoning, I took a look at the under. I think it's in like the minus 150 range at this point. I didn't bet it quite yet. And John, I wanted to ask you about this. So earlier today, Erosa comes out with a quote, something along the lines of, I don't have it in front of me, but, I hope Jourdain is ready to wrestle for a full 15 minutes. And I think normally I don't put much stock into what fighters say in fighter interviews because it's always, I'm in the best shape of my life. I had a great training camp. Everything's great. But when you hear someone say something pertaining to their game plan, especially when it's a guy like Julian Erosa who, he lands over a takedown per 15, but you're not thinking like, oh yeah, Julian Erosa is going to go in there trying to wrestle super hard this weekend. Does that change your approach to the fight at all? Because for me, like I'm a little skeptical to play the under here if I think there's going to be a lot of grappling, and just kind of, I guess I'll ask you that. And then also, what would you make of a potential grappling sequence here? Like Jourdain has subs on his record. I would think the grappling's somewhat competitive. What are your thoughts in this spot?
Yeah, I believe Erosa in terms of the game plan, because I think that is a clear advantage for him in terms of the wrestling. I think the takedowns are going to be there. I think he is the better submission grappler as well. And also, like, it's tough to okay, so I was originally going to bet fight ends by KO because it just seems like super clear to me. Like you mentioned, both these guys are bangers, both of them defensively liabilities defensively. And Erosa is coming off a knockout just not even 2 months ago against Sungwoo Choi. He's been knocked out multiple times. It's like, I don't know if either of these guys, I wouldn't say they're chinny, but it's like they just don't play defense and they get hit a lot. So obviously you're going to get knocked out. And we've seen Jourdain hurt in multiple fights as well. So it's not that he's like indestructible either. But I actually do think Erosa is going to at least try to implement the wrestling and grappling because that's a clear advantage for him in this matchup. And he's a guy who's been knocked out multiple times now. Quick turnaround off getting knocked out again. Like, it just makes total sense to me that he would go and try to wrestle and grapple here. And that was sort of why I hesitated on the fight ends by KO, because I could see him just coming in with a wrestle heavy game plan. We know he's a decent submission grappler as well on the mat. So, but in terms of the fight overall, I still do like the under, just because it's like, yeah, he probably will wrestle a little bit more than normal, but we know he's one to be, he can definitely be baited into a war on the feet. And I would not be surprised to see maybe him wrestle, land takedowns, have success in round 1. And then round 2 starts, he gets hit once or twice, and then it's just fight mode from that point on, and they just go to war. So I do think we see a finish here. I lean Jourdain just because I trust his durability a little bit more. But if I knew that Erosa was going to stick to that wrestle heavy game plan, it definitely does make me have a little bit more interest in him as an underdog. But overall, I'm going to get exposure to both sides. I think that's the way to target it. I think we do see a finish here. Shout out to Rummy in the chat. He says Erosa wants to get in Jourdain's head to keep his hands low to expect takedowns. That's certainly a possibility as well. A little game theory from the fighters as well. Pepe says Jourdain flying knee round 1. Wouldn't be surprised. He looks for that flying knee very often, especially his first couple fights. We saw it a lot more, but that's definitely like one of his signature moves. So I wouldn't be surprised if he tried that here against Erosa. But yeah, it should be a fun scrap. Anything else to add on your side, Jonah?
Not really, man. Like, I'm picking Jourdain for similar reasons. I think his durability is just a little bit more consistent. I do think that, like, if they were to scramble, Jourdain plays off his back a little bit, but he, theoretically he's a black belt. I bet him to win by submission in that Rojo fight. And the number was not super inflated. He is a guy who will throw plenty of submission attempts. I think it was the Kulabau fight where he he tried to submit him like 3 or 4 times. And Erosa will go for subs on the ground as well. Like Erosa, he has those super long limbs that are great for jiu-jitsu in general. So I think that the finishes lie kind of wherever the fight goes. But the comments from Erosa, maybe I'm a fish, maybe I'm falling for the mind games that he's trying to use to get in Jourdain's head. But I think I'm going to pass on this fight, but it should be probably one of the most entertaining fights, hopefully, on Saturday night. So definitely looking forward to that one. Let's move on to the biggest favorite on the card, John. We got Jack Shore right now, minus 525. We got Liudvik Sholinian at plus 385 is the underdog. Shore's as high as minus 600 in some spots as of Thursday afternoon. He's only $9.1 thousand on DK, and Sholinian 7.1. So it's one of those scenarios where we only have 10 fighters, and he's the biggest favorite by 400 cents on the money line. We don't have many fighters over minus 200 this weekend. We have Tom Aspinall in the co-main event, and then Darren Till's has been bordering on kind of getting to that minus 180, minus 200 spot. But minus 600 is certainly not a number that many others are in the ballpark of this weekend. So Shore's the biggest favorite here. I expect him to roll. I kind of regret not betting Shore. Shore was minus 275 on BetMGM, and originally I was going to bet it because I'm a Jack Shore fan, and, I didn't think Sholinian was that great on The Ultimate Fighter, which is where he's coming off of right now. But I took a look. I rewatched his Ultimate Fighter fights. I think that Shore has him covered for sure. We haven't really seen Sholinian get out grappled too often. I mean, certainly he hasn't fought someone the level of Jack Shore before, but with Sholinian, he's not a bad grappler. His cardio is a little bit suspect. We've seen that on his Bellator fight, I believe it was. He had a fight where his cardio really slowed down, and he also had another fight. I'm going to pull up his regional record right now that I remember watching, and he slowed down considerably. I believe this is a Cachero fight in LFA 2 fights ago. But on The Ultimate Fighter, I mean, he fought a decent strength of schedule. He fought this kid, Mitch Raposo, who I believe he fights out of the Boston Cartel. He was in Chris Moutinho's corner the other month. But Raposo only has like 5 or 6 pro fights, and Liudvik beat him. And I know it's not a big deal because The Ultimate Fighter is not super high level, but I would not be surprised to see like Mitch Raposo win several UFC fights in the future. Granted, he's still young, he's still green, but like Liudvik has some game. He's taking the fight on 10 days notice. Certainly not a spot that I think bodes well for him. And then he lost to Ricky Terci on the show as well, who we all saw making his UFC debut last week. So I guess bottom line here is I regret not betting Shore at minus 275. I don't think Liudvik is as big as a bum as I originally did before going back and watching his tape, but it's one of those things where like he wins by marginally out grappling people, and he's not going to out grapple Jack Shore, and Shore has the better gas tank here, probably even the better stand up, and Shore's primarily a grappler. So yeah, a whole lot of talking to say. I think minus 600 is about right. Jack Shore, I'm not getting fancy with it on DK this week. We mentioned you got to prioritize fighters who are going to win. I mean, Jack Shore wins this fight above 80% of the time. I feel pretty confident saying that. So yeah, it'll be a lot of Shore for me on DK, and I think the price is pretty warranted at minus 600. John, anything to add here? Were you sharp enough to get on the line before it moved, or are you just like me, just regretting not getting in on the minus 275?
No, you made me a little bit nervous there. All that love for Liudvik in that breakdown. I was like, man, is he going somewhere with this? But you brought it back full circle. I'm with you. I think this is just a levels thing. Like, yeah, Liudvik's not like a complete and total bum. Like, sure, but he's not fighting like Jerome Rivera. Like, if he were, then I think we might have a little bit of interest in him here. Especially if he were an underdog in that matchup. But you're talking about Jack Shore, who we've both been historically really high on. Super high level Welsh prospect, undefeated, 14-0. He's looked good every step of the way. Cashed a max bet on him against Hunter Azure in his last fight. I just think he is levels better than Liudvik here. Like it's not even close. Whether it's the wrestling, the grappling. And you mentioned the stand-up. I thought Jack Shore's striking looked the best it's ever have in that Hunter Azure fight. Like he's clearly been working on his striking because he wants to evolve as a fighter and show he's more than just, a wrestle blanket fighter, like with good grappling. But yeah, this is just however he wants it. I think he's going to get it. And I actually bet him. I did bet back Jack Shore, but not at the money line. I bet him inside the distance at minus 120. And what's interesting is the market's actually moved against me because a lot of people have bet him to win by decision. So I'm probably going to end up adding, not necessarily to Jack Shore inside the distance, but probably just take the under 2.5 at a better price. It really comes down to whatever the better price is there, because I do think Shore gets it done within the first 2 rounds. Like I said, I think he just absolutely rolls here, and he's the top play on the DraftKings slate as well.
Yeah, some places offer the points handicap, so it'll be like Shore minus 3.5. So if he wins by more than 3.5 points, like cumulatively across all 3 judges' scorecards, so if he wins a 29-28 times 3 unanimous decision, that'll mean he only won by 3 points, so he wouldn't cover. But if he gets 130-27 and 229-28, he covers. If he finishes inside the distance, he wins. I think that number at like minus 300, I saw that come out in some spots. I think that's probably value. Like, I really do expect Jack Shore to win here. And my point on Liudvik was more so like, that's why I ended up passing. I still thought that Shore was the side. At minus 600, he's probably not the side. But at minus 275, I regret not betting it. But I was just talking through like my process for the reason I didn't bet it, as I went back and I was like, you want to know what? Like, Liudvik isn't terrible, but I might have just forgotten like Jack Shore is a guy that we're both high on. You mentioned you literally cashed a max bet on him his last time out. So definitely a guy. Let it be known the undisputed guys we're in on Jack Shore here, and expect him to get another win and continue being an undefeated prospect. Hopefully he gets a step up after this, because he was supposed to fight like 4 different guys this weekend, and I'd like to see him in a remotely competitive fight at some point soon. All right, let's move on to our next fight of the night here. We got Julian Kim. She's an exact pick'em in some spots, minus 110 a piece against Molly McCann. Certain books have her as a small favorite. We have at the bottom on the ticker of our screen, we got Kim minus 125, McCann plus 105. So regardless of where you look, pretty closely lined fight, pretty much a pick'em. At this point, we got Kim $8,200 on DraftKings. We got McCann $8K flat. And John, you are someone who has historically been a Molly McCann backer every step of the way. You are a fan of the meatball, and I love Molly McCann as well. I do think this is an interesting matchup here, because I think Julian Kim is probably the better striker out of these 2 fighters, but she doesn't have great statistics to back it up. Like, I watched the tape here, and I think Kim probably boxes her up. Then you look at the stats, she has a negative strike differential, and she's honestly just fought higher level strikers than McCann has, which is probably what it comes down to, right? Antonio Shevchenko, who we make fun of because she can't grapple, and people thought she could grapple for a second and then she couldn't. But Alexa Grasso, like, these are high level boxers in the women's division. So I think that Kim has the striking advantage here, big reach advantage that I'm sure you'll touch on at some point in your breakdown for this fight. But I think it's a close fight. I favor Kim on the feet. I think it's pick'em makes a little bit of sense, because I think that Molly, we've seen her be able to mix in the takedowns, right? And Kim's been taken down in her last 3 fights, has pretty terrible takedown defense is how I would describe it. But the issue with McCann is she doesn't really have great control. We've seen her take down fighters multiple times before. The Cachoeira fight, she took her down multiple times there. There's another fight back against Ariane Lipsky, who we know is a super bad grappler, like legitimately terrible. And McCann got takedowns, but it wasn't like she was racking up time on top. So I think it's like Kim on the feet wins by a considerable amount, and then McCann wins the grappling, but I'm just not sure how wide the margin will be. So I'll pick Kim here, but I do think it's a close fight. I like the fact that Molly McCann moves forward the entire time, and in close fights, optics, stuff like that certainly helps. So yeah, I think a pick'em's about right. Close fight. John, do you have anything here between Kim and Molly McCann? Are you backing your girl Molly for the 25th time in a row here?
So I knew you were gonna take a shot at me. Anytime Meatball Molly's on the card, believe it or not, I believe we both bet her. Who did we bet her against? It was like a pick'em, or she was a slight underdog. It was like,
dude, Tyler Santos. I think I got like over 100 cents. I think I bet her as an underdog.
Ton of CLB, bet her as an underdog. She closed as like what, a minus 130 favorite or something?
No, dude, she closed like minus 200, John. Like,
oh, okay. I thought it was. I didn't think it was that good. But either way, like, we're just bathing in CLB on Molly McCann, and she just gets absolutely dominated. Like, it wasn't even like close. So yeah. So but to be honest with you, I actually did consider betting Molly again here, and part of me is like, I burned enough money on her, might as well just do it again, right? But I ended up passing, because I'll be honest, low level women's MMA has not been my bread and butter, especially over the past year. So I decided to pass, but I have seen a lot of Kim love out there, and I don't really agree with it. Obviously, she has a huge reach advantage, 10-inch reach advantage. And I think that's why a lot of people are gravitating to her. But to be honest, I just don't think she's that good. And it's not that Molly's that good either, but it's like people are just like, oh, 10-inch reach advantage. Like she's going to win the striking and win. Like she's not a high volume striker. She's typically more of a counter striker. She doesn't move her head. She gets hit a lot, you know, and that Alexa Grasso, we both are high on Alexa Grasso. So it was kind of to be expected, but she was, I mean, landing every single time she threw her right hand, like it was on repeat. And Kim's super durable, so she ate them all pretty well. But it was like, I mean, super concerning. Molly's not a terrible boxer. I think she can close distance. She's going to move forward, like you said. And she's not a good wrestler, but it's very easy to cap Molly McCann in fights where it's like if she's fighting somebody that has horrible takedown defense and no sense of wrestling and grappling, well, then she's probably going to land a couple takedowns. And if she's fighting somebody that's either more physically stronger than her or has some sense of wrestling and grappling, then she's probably going to get taken down many times and controlled because she's not a good grappler herself. Even in those fights where she landed multiple takedowns, Priscilla Cachoeira and Ariana Lipsky, it's like she wasn't successfully wrestling. Like she shot like, in one fight, I think she was 2 for 11 on takedowns. The other one, I think it was like 2 for 13 or something like that. Like she's not a good wrestler, but Kim defends at like 43%, like horrible takedown defense. Like if Molly's moving forward, being more aggressive, like I think she could take her down eventually. And in a close fight where I do think the margins are pretty thin here, like I do think Kim is a better striker, but it's not like I think she's going to be winning rounds convincingly, especially when the optics are going to not really be in her favor. And then you add in, maybe she gets taken down once or twice as well. I do have interest in Molly in terms of DraftKings. I think she's a decent underdog to target, throws decent volume, could potentially have a path to victory that involves multiple takedowns. So I like Meatball again. Shocker there. You know, she's got Paddy Pimblett on the card, Tom Aspinall, Darren Till. She's got all her UK buddies on the card. She's going to come out fired up. Give me Molly McCann. Maybe I'll have a bet come Saturday. We'll see.
Getting fired up on a Thursday afternoon for a Molly McCann fight. Nothing like it. It's staple here on the Undisputed Show. Let's move on and talk about one of her teammates. We got Paddy Pimblett up next, making his UFC debut. Much anticipated UFC debut for the kid out of Liverpool. He is a -155 favorite against Luigi Vendramini, who comes back after a loss to Fares Ziam a little bit earlier this year on the Adesanya versus Vettori card. We got Paddy as a -155 favorite, so again, a little bit of respect from the bookies in his UFC debut. Vendramini +135 as the dog here. Pimblett 8.3K on DK. Vendramini 7.9, and I think this is an interesting matchup because, you know, you hear so much about Paddy Pimblett. I think some of it comes from Darren Till's ability to market himself and his friends on social media. Like Paddy Pimblett doesn't have a fight in the UFC and is getting like one-on-ones with Ariel Helwani on Instagram Live because like the kid is controversial and says things that make people laugh and says things that offend people, and basically he just has the ability to sell himself, right? Like Paddy Pimblett, people know who this kid is, despite the fact, like, you look at his record, I mean, yeah, he has success over in Cage Warriors, there's no doubt about it, but he's also lost several fights there. Like he lost to Nad Narimani, who has not had a ton of UFC success. You go back and watch a few of his fights. It's not like this kid is the best fighter in the world. So I kind of expected that I would bet on Vendramini here because I thought that the market would just kind of see the name Pimblett and be like, oh yeah, Paddy the Baddie. Like we know this kid. He trains with, you know, Darren Till and all those guys and Tom Aspinall. So yeah, -250, something like that. And he does have impressive wins on his resume. And in terms of how his skills break down, you know, I have watched tape on Paddy before. I've seen him fight live. I think he's a pretty explosive grappler just in terms of the pure offense and jiu-jitsu throughout the first couple of rounds. Like you watch the Soren Bach fight, which he ends up losing over the course of a 5-round decision, but he takes the back early in round 1 and gets a choke sunk in tight. Like I don't know how he didn't finish that fight. But then eventually, just as time wears on, his takedown defense isn't great. He finds himself on like the bad exchange of getting his back taken, or the bad end of getting his back taken, as opposed to the good end, which is when you take your opponent's back. And I don't know. His striking is like very, very basic. He does have a decent like check hook counter that I've seen him land a few times. He is only 26 years old. He kind of had weird layoffs, right, where he didn't fight for almost a year and a half, 2 years during the pandemic. His last fight came this year in March. He hadn't fought in a year prior to that fight. So it's one of those things with Paddy Pimblett where like he hasn't fought a ton. he's likely getting better. He's only 26. He certainly does have one like element to his game that I do believe is strong. Like I do think that he's going to be able to out grapple guys at the UFC level. Just his takedown defense isn't great. His takedown offense, like in terms of his wrestling, isn't great. And with Vendramini, you know, I don't think he's a great fighter by any stretch, but in the Yeon fight, like he had moments of flash knockdown, ended on top. We've seen him be explosive and get first round finishes in the UFC before. I think he's certainly the better striker here. And I think you made a play on that, John, here. I think I saw a prop for you in the bet tracker where you're backing Vendramini to win by KO early in this fight. Is that right?
Yeah, KO 1 at plus 950 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I think that's a decent read here. I think he's going to win the striking, and I think Paddy, like if Paddy gets the back in the first round, I think has a good shot to finish the fight, and I'm rooting for that because I do think that this kid is fadeable down the line. But at this point, I was expecting to bet on Vendramini, or plus 135 is probably not enough for me to do so. If it gets to plus 150, plus 160 on fight day, I might take a shot for a unit. But yeah, I think people have really hot takes on Paddy Pimblett where they think he's just either this like future champ sort of deal or like, oh, this kid's a total bum, he doesn't know how to strike. I think it's somewhere in the middle where like he has this one thing he's good at, and that's offensively grappling. And if he can't get that going, I think he's going to really struggle to win fights at the UFC level, even against guys like Luigi Vendramini, who is not someone that I would consider like, oh, a gatekeeper of the top 20 or a gatekeeper of the top 30, something like that. It's just kind of like a mid-level fight. So that's my take on here, John. Talk to me. I know you had that prop on Vendramini to win in round 1, and you also have another prop on this fight. So yeah, talk to me about kind of what do you think about Pimblett as a whole, first of all, because I do think he's kind of an interesting figure to talk about this fight week, and then the fight in general.
Yeah, you know, you bring up that people are kind of split on him. I've pretty much seen everybody just think he's a total bum from what I've seen. And I think part of that is probably because, you know, he rubs a lot of people the wrong way. But yeah, I mean, I'm always interested in a fighter who's able to market themselves, and UFC adding new talent, new guys that they could potentially build around, you know, whether they're as good as they seem to think they are or not. You know, he's definitely not shy about the confidence that he has. Whether he can back that up, only time will tell come Saturday, but we'll see. I mean, like you said, you know, his grappling is certainly there. You know, you watch him going back years, like, cause he's been fighting for a while over in Cage Warriors, and early on, right? Like he definitely gave me Chase Hooper vibes, like very good grappler, crafty grappler, punching bag on the feet, like really just kind of gangly, little bit scrawny, like, and that, like, he did fight at 145, was the featherweight champ over at 145 in Cage Warriors before moving up. But now you see the progression over his the last few years, and he hasn't fought a ton over the last few years, but I think you start to see the progression where not only is he filling out physically at 155, where he starts to look a little bit better physically, and look a little bit stronger inside the octagon, but also it seems like the striking is starting to improve. The defense is getting better. He's starting to move his head a little bit. He's adding weapons to his game. His striking looks better. The takedowns are coming like with more technique. Like I definitely have seen the improvements over the last couple fights of his. Even though, you know, his last two haven't lasted that long. And some of the competition hasn't been the greatest either, but it definitely seems like a guy who's still young, still improving. Like I don't want to be on the wrong side of that, but on the flip side, he is still a liability defensively. And against a guy like Vendramini, who we know is very explosive early in the fights, and he's going to carry power throughout, but especially early. You go back and watch every Vendramini fight, like he is swinging with everything he has early in the fight, trying to take your head off. And like I said, Paddy Pimblett will go out there. He'll eat punches with his face. He'll throw naked leg kicks. Like, just, you're going to get countered more times than not. And if Vendramini's countering you with one of those hooks that he puts all of his power into, then you're probably going to get knocked out. And I know Pimblett has shown good durability in the past, but like, that doesn't mean he can't get knocked out here. Like, so just the way I see the fight playing out, I think plus 950 is a good number on Vendramini by knockout in the first round. Just a small stab for me, a quarter unit, plus 950. The other prop I played was fight doesn't start round 2 at plus 188 on FanDuel, and that's more so just how I see the fight playing out. I know a lot of sharp people like the over in this fight. I don't. I like the under just because of the way these guys fight. Like, I think styles make fights. Paddy Pimblett, if he's half as good as he thinks he is, then he should go in there and take care of business and cut right through Vendramini on the mat and submit him. And I think a submission's live. Vendramini is a decent grappler himself, but Pimblett's just dangerous. I wouldn't be shocked if he can get the submission. And on the flip side, I've already laid the case for why I think Vendramini can knock him out early as well. So I think we're getting almost 2-1 on our money for the fight not to end or to end in the first round. So I played that for just under 3/4 of a unit to win 1 unit over on FanDuel as well. So yeah, so I'm expecting a finish here. I think it's a good fight to target on both sides. I lean Paddy Pimblett, but again, Vendramini certainly explosive, certainly live. And you mentioned if he gets to that plus 150, 160 range, I'm with you. If I see a plus 150, I'm going to take the shot on the dog in Vendramini for sure.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Like, I'm picking Paddy Pimblett, but he's got to prove a few things before I'm ready to back him as a favorite in the UFC. And so should be a fun fight. I'm looking forward to that one for sure. Let's move on to our next fight on the main card. We got Modestas Bukauskas. He's minus 155, $8,500 against Khalil. Rountree comes back plus 135 for Rountree. He's $7,700 on DK. I think this is an interesting fight because kind of what we've seen from both these guys in the UFC career, like Bukauskas. Obviously, the famous cage door fall back KO against Andreas Michailidis, who, like, after the end of round 1, like, fell into the side of the cage and the ref waved it off. But like, Bukauskas had a good first round, but he didn't really knock him out the way he goes down his record. Then just kind of gets like leveled by Jimmy Crute in the sense like he was just not on the same level to fight Jimmy Crute, and so literally and figuratively, because he really did get leveled in that fight, got knocked out, lost a decision to Mikhail Zaitchuk in his last fight. And then with Khalil Rountree, like, this is a guy came in losing streak on the UFC, coming into the UFC, and then put together a decent couple of fights, but has lost 3 of his last 4. I would not be surprised if the loser of this fight does not get another UFC fight after this one. So certainly high stakes. Apparently the people in the Twitter comments are talking about how Dana White Contender Series is so good because the fights mean so much. I think that every fight means a lot to all these fighters. They're putting their health and safety on the line to go entertain us. So I don't really agree with that take, but certainly it feels like the loser of this fight could be leaving town. In terms of how I see the fight going, I think Khalil probably has a little bit of success early. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets him out of there. Bukauskas has good cardio. We talked about it before. Like in the Cage Warriors, some of his wins were kind of like the Hamlet fight. Like he was getting beat up bad and then kind of comes back and just kind of out cardios people to come back. And I think that might be what he does here against Rountree, which is interesting because at minus 155, if you're going to have to survive an early storm, that's certainly not a number I'm laying on Bukauskas. But at the other time, like at the others on the other side, I should say, like, Khalil is just so not an inspiring guy to bet on because he's not that durable. He has virtually no wrestling upside. He's kind of relying on a KO. He slows down as the fight goes on. So there's some talk in the FTN Bets Discord this week about betting Khalil Rountree finish only. So if the fight goes to scorecards, which I don't think is likely to begin with, it's like minus 300 to finish inside the distance, but you could get Rountree finish only, like plus 140, better than his money line. I think that is how I would play it if I had to play it, but I prefer really just to not get involved on this, what I would describe as a very light heavyweighty matchup this weekend. So yeah, nothing for me on the betting side. DK, you obviously need to target one side. I think Rountree at 7.7K has the more finishing upside early and is an underdog. So I'll likely get suckered into some shares on DraftKings, but not a fight that I'm super excited to really have any sort of money on. John, anything for you here? And what I believe we're calling not even our featured bet of the night. We got 3 fights to go after this. But yeah, anything for you in Bukauskas versus Rountree?
Yeah, no play for me. I do actually lean the Bukauskas side. It's really just like Rountree is so difficult to trust at this point. Like he retired, came back, pretty much looked like he was just coming back for a paycheck. Did not look good against Marcin Prachniow. Just like you said, just didn't let his hands go. And that's really his biggest issue. Like if he doesn't get that early knockout, the volume fades, he slows down, he just doesn't do much. And Bukauskas on the flip side, where he's not really very talented, at least he has good cardio. We know he's going to fight for your money for 3 rounds. So I do favor Bukauskas, and he does have at least some power. He has heavy leg kicks. Like you said, we know he's going to throw in the all 3 rounds, whereas Rountree is going to slow down. So I do lean Bukauskas. I think he has a chance to win by knockout himself, but I'm actually considering playing the Bukauskas by decision, where, maybe the first round's close and then Rountree starts to slow and Bukauskas just does more and nobody gets a finish and Bukauskas wins a decision. I think that might be kind of interesting, but overall, yeah, I lean Bukauskas. But like you said, if somebody's going to win by knockout in the first round, it probably comes on the Rountree side. He's just so difficult to trust at this point. I would say wait until Saturday when we have a good feel on how ownership shakes out. If he's going to be like one of the lowest owned fighters, and I don't know if he will be, I'm just saying if he isn't one of the lowest, then I'd have a little bit more interest. Just trying to get different on a 10 fight card, of course.
Yeah, and so if you want to bet that Modestas by decision prop, I see a plus 460 on FanDuel, plus 450 on MGM. Those are like considerably better than the rest of the market, offshore and other legal books as well, other domestic US books. So I would bet that sooner rather than later if you are looking for that round 3 prop. I do think plus 460 is a decent number. It's not really a read I'm on, not something I'll bet. But if you're like Jon or Jon himself and you see that angle, I think that's a pretty decent number, plus 460 over on FanDuel Sportsbook right now. All right, let's move on to the featured bout of the night. We got Alex Morono and David Zawada coming in. Close fight. Line currently stands at Morono minus 130, Zawada plus 110. This is an interesting fight because I'm not really sure how you feel about it, Jon, but for me, coming into the week, Alex Morono's definitely fought a decent strength schedule. He fought, Cowboy and Pettis aren't what they used to be, but they're decent names. Like, it seems like the UFC might be trying to build this guy up. And I think Alex Morono, historically, I've been decently high on him. The problem with Morono is, like, he's so underwhelming, man. Like, he doesn't do anything great. He's a decent striker. He hits kind of hard. Like, his striking metrics look way better than his tape does. And he's a decent grappler when the fight gets there. Like, we saw him against Reese McKee really have success on the ground, but his takedown defense is awful, 52%. Anyone who really tries to take him down has had success doing so. And with Zawada, he's also fought like a decent strength of schedule. Like, comes in against Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts, loses a split decision in that fight, shows off his grappling a little bit, then fights the Leech, which was a competitive fight where both guys hurt each other. He ends up losing by KO, beats Abubakar Nurmagomedov, who looked much better in his last fight. Zawada wins that via triangle in round 1. I don't think many people had that one penciled in as the result they were kind of expecting when you go and you see a guy from Germany going up against someone with the last name Nurmagomedov. But in his last fight, it was a similar thing where Ramazan Ameed is just a tough opponent and was kind of able to rack up top control against him. So I think it comes down to, I think if you got an early Zawada price, I think you did a good job. I think the current line is about right. Like, we've seen more out of Morono. He's fought in the UFC for a longer period of time. He should be the much cleaner striker here, but if Zawada shoots like a bunch of takedowns in bulk, I think he's going to land a decent amount of them, and he's an okay grappler. So I'll pick Morono, I guess, but it's not something I have confidence in. Really a fight that I found kind of puzzling to try and break down throughout the entirety of the week. So Jon, do you have a strong read here? Like, this is just a fight that I've kind of struggled with, honestly. So any help would be appreciated.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a strong read, but I definitely think I trust Morono just to do more. That's really the only confident read I have on this fight, is just I trust him to do more and to be more active. And so I obviously favor him to win minutes because Zawada, historically very low volume. Yes, he does have power. I think like 8 of his 11 wins have come by knockout. Good grappler as well, like you mentioned. Both of these guys are Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. But yeah, Zawada is just like a big moment fighter to me. He really just has to have big moments or win by finish. And unless I just really have a good read on how the fight plays out and think that finish can materialize, then I'm probably not backing them. And so I do favor Morono. I just think he has a striking advantage here. He's going to throw more volume. Both guys sort of have durability issues. So yeah, I mean, it's not really the most confident read, like I said, but I just think Morono, who again is just going to do more. He's fought the better level of competition. And I think he's just as likely to get a finish as Zawada here. So I favor him to win this matchup. And I think he's not a terrible play on DraftKings, but I do think the fight goes to decision. So on a 10-fight card. This one's kind of, we're scraping for, aside from like Jack Shore, I feel like we're scraping for like real clear high upside targets. So in the mid-range, even if I think it goes to decision, at least we know Morono's going to throw volume. This fight could have a little bit of grappling. He's not the worst target on a 10-fight card.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Let's move on to another person who I think, in general, people this week are pretty high on Tom Aspinall in terms of a DK guy that they feel comfortable backing. He is $9,000 as a minus 255 favorite this weekend against Sergey Spivak. Spivak comes back plus 205, 7.2K for him on DraftKings. And I'll go first here because I have a pretty strong, fiery take on this fight. I bet Spivak plus 225 for a unit. I also bet the over 1.5 rounds plus 110 for a unit. And I think those are kind of correlated, and meaning like the longer the fight goes, the more I would favor Spivak to take over Aspinall. But let's start with Tom Aspinall because this guy is undefeated in the UFC, 3-0, came in. Jake Collier gets him out of there early. Alain Badeau, who I max bet Tom Aspinall in that spot against Alain Badeau, gets the finish. And then I think what's most interesting is the Andre Arlovsky fight his last time out, because had a decent round against Andre Arlovsky, who I will give credit is a difficult guy to just kind of outpoint on the feet in general. And Aspinall did a decent job, but then just a weird sequence where I thought he was really slowing down in round 2. And part of that was because he had a huge flurry where he thought he had Arlovsky out of there. And I don't really think he was close, but Aspinall clearly thought he was and just kind of unloaded the tank. But I thought he was gassing out. And then there's this weird sequence where like he kind of takes down Arlovsky, but wasn't like a situation where it was a dominant takedown, and finds himself on the back, and Arlovsky just doesn't protect his neck whatsoever, and Aspinall gets a submission win. I've seen people call this guy like the pride of UK Jiu-Jitsu, and I mean, I know he has a black belt, and everyone talks about that. I know his family runs the gym or whatever, and for me, Aspinall, like, he has decent hands, and I think he's a pretty precise puncher for heavyweight. But in the tape I've seen, like, he can be put on his back, and he seems like really, his get-up game was not there. And we've only seen him on the first round, I think, 3 times at this point in his career. And prior to his win over Arlovsky, which came at the beginning of the first round, he never won a fight that left the first round. So I think he could knock out Sergey Spivak early in this fight for sure. So he's worth ownership on DK, but I don't think that the line of minus 225 is really warranted. Sergey Spivak, I will be the first to admit, his last fight where I bet him at minus 250 was certainly not his best performance, which was a unanimous decision win over Alexei Oleinik. But this is a guy who, I guess, like, Spivak got knocked completely, I mean, really hurt bad against Walt Harris. Pretty much didn't land a strike in his UFC debut. But since then, I mean, there was the Marcin Tybura fight where he just kind of got out-grappled by Marcin Tybura, who I think is kind of in the middle of a y'all must have forgot kind of sequence of his career where Marcin Tybura is making a push towards the top 10, top 5 at heavyweight. But other than that, like, I mean, Spivak in his wins, he's a guy who's going to look to wrestle, and I think he's a better wrestler than Aspinall. I don't know if he's a better grappler than a gi, but in terms of MMA, from what I've seen, like, if Spivak gets on top, he's a dangerous guy. Like, the Felipe win has aged well. The Vendera win has even aged better than we thought it would. The Tai Tuivasa, everyone knows Tai Tuivasa can't grapple, but, like, I feel like it's a similar spot. If you get Tai Tuivasa down, you can win the fight. I think if you get Tom Aspinall down, extend the fight, I think this is closer to like 60% for Aspinall, maybe like minus 160 range, as opposed to minus 250, minus 260 like he was earlier this week. And I just think the over is good too. I mentioned that Aspinall's only been to the second round 3 times, but Spivak, I think, is going to be pretty durable, and I think he's reliable to, even if he can't get Aspinall down, I don't think he's going to be standing 6-7 feet away from him in space getting ready to get knocked out. I think it's going to be more of like a clinch against the fence, ugly heavyweight fight. And so yeah, I'll take a unit on Spivak, a unit on the over 1.5. That's my read here. John, are you on the other side? Because I've seen a lot of people thinking that Tom Aspinall is getting the finish in round 1 this weekend, and while I acknowledge that that's a lot of his win condition, for me, I can't ever imagine laying that sort of number on the guy. So I'm curious, what's your take on this fight? Do you think Spivak is a live underdog, or are you on the Aspinall side?
Yeah, I think if you are on the Aspinall side, the way to target him is round 1 knockout at plus 240 on FanDuel. I didn't personally play it, but I don't hate the number there, and that is his most likely path to victory here. I don't hate the dog shot whatsoever. It's never a bad idea to go with an underdog who has potentially a path to victory with that involves wrestling, where it's like, okay, he probably has a cardio advantage. He just needs to survive the first round, wear on him a little bit, and you're feeling pretty good with your plus 225 or whatever. But yeah, I ended up passing myself. I thought I was going to be in on Spivak early in the week, and then after taping the matchup, decided to pass. Like I said, I don't hate the dog shot. I just didn't get there personally. I do think it's a good fight to target, though, because whereas Aspinall can win by knockout early, going to score well on DraftKings, Spivak, if he wins, it probably comes by a grindy decision where he maybe banks some control time and lands some takedowns. And at a cheap price, that's going to do enough for you to score well as well. And if Aspinall is going to be one of the more most owned fighters on the slate, then, it makes sense to take Spivak for sure. So we just got to see how ownership shakes out come Saturday. That's basically all I'm looking to do is on a 10-fight card, you're just trying to identify the leverage spots. And this could be one of them. So come Saturday, I might be on the Spivak side with you. We'll see.
Yeah, I agree. You need to identify the leverage spots, and I don't think this might be one of them. I think this will be one of them. I don't personally love 10-fight slates. The bigger the slate, I think the more decisions people have to make, the bigger edge for better players, which I like to consider myself a part of. So I don't love 10-fight slates, but I'll probably run a single entry team this week, and I'll tell you right now, there's a pretty good chance that it has Sergey Spivak on it on a Saturday at 7.2K. I just think the wrestling upside is there, and I think that really massive leverage over Aspinall, who I think is going to be highly owned, right? You get Jack Short at 9.1K. There's no reason that people aren't going to be jamming in both of those guys at the top of the price range. You could play both of them and still have 8K left over for your 4 remaining fighters, 8K per fighter. So I think we'll see a lot of builds kind of start with Jack Shore this weekend and then Tom Aspinall, and I think a good way to get differences. You don't have to fade Jack Shore, who's minus 600, and we both think rolls to victory, but you could fade Aspinall with a guy who directly has what we would consider the opposite leverage, right? Like both guys can't win. So if Aspinall loses, someone has to win, and that someone is Spivak. So I think he has a lot of upside and makes for a really strong leverage play at 7.2K. This weekend, I will be writing my DFS targets article up at FTN Daily that comes out on Thursday afternoons. And spoiler alert, Sergey Spivak will be the low tier fighter featured in that article. All right, let's move on to the main event here, John. We have gone through 9 fights. We got one more to go. We got Darren the Gorilla Till minus 180, 8.8K against Derek Brunson, who I believe is back to the blonde hair this weekend, Bleach Brunson this weekend. He comes back plus 150 dog, $7.4 thousand on DraftKings. And John, I'll let you go first here in the main event. I saw you had a bet up in the FTN bets tracker. Talk to me about the matchup and who you're picking.
Yeah, just like Molly McCann, anytime there's a Darren Till fight, I just shut up and take my money. So yeah, I bet Darren Till to win by knockout at plus 145. I really do think this is a good spot for him to win by knockout. Clear striking advantage. Derek Brunson, in theory, I don't hate the dog shot. Wrestling path to victory here. Plus 160 is a decent number. You can get him plus 500 to win by decision on FanDuel. That's a good number as well. Those are tempting, but it's like, I just really think Darren Till knocks him out. Like Darren Till's historically had really strong takedown defense. Even in his last fight where he was taken down twice by Robert Whittaker, he stuffed 9 of those 11 takedown attempts by Whittaker. I could see that being a similar thing here where maybe Brunson gets him down once or twice, but Brunson having to shoot 10 plus times, like the cardio, having to wrestle that much and avoid the power shots and having the cardio hold up is just a tall ask. And even in the fight against Kevin Holland, where he looked good, and I believe we both cashed an underdog ticket there was still a lot of moments in that fight that were very dicey, where we were on the edge of our seats sweating a little bit. Not you, because you don't tilt, but I was sweating a little bit on my Derek Brunson. But he's been knocked out, 5 times now. Going to be at a striking disadvantage, in my opinion. He's going to have to work really hard to get those takedowns. I just think over the course of 5 rounds, like maybe if this was a 3-round fight, actually not even maybe, if this was a 3-round fight at these same odds, I probably would be betting Derek Brunson here. Like I would at plus 160. I think he could potentially do enough to win 2 of the 3 rounds, but over a 5-round fight here, I just think there's going to be enough striking exchanges. It's going to play out enough on the feet where Darren Till catches him at some point and wins by knockout. It just didn't make sense to me seeing Darren Till at a -180 tag, but yet his knockout prop is +145. Like, I would be shocked if it just shocks me that that's not closer. Like, I wouldn't be completely shocked if he won by decision, but I would be surprised. Like, I think a knockout is very clearly his highest percentage outcome on the Darren Till side. So I think the money line and the knockout prop is what I was trying to say. It should be a lot closer, and the odds don't reflect that. So Darren Till by knockout +145 for a unit. Let's do it.
I will pick Till as well. You know, Darren Till, I think, is a super frustrating fighter. Everyone talked this weekend about, or last weekend, I should say, about Tyron Woodley, and he was fighting Jake Paul, obviously. And, Tyron never lets his hands go. He's so frustrating to watch. You want to know who didn't let his hands go against Tyron Woodley? Is Darren Till. Like, Darren Till I don't think he landed a strike in that fight. And it's one of those things where Darren Till I don't think he's ever landed more than 50 significant strikes in a fight before. He just doesn't throw a ton of volume, which I think makes him really hard to back in a money line price like -180. The thing about Derek Brunson is historically Brunson was this guy who he'd blitz in, and his striking is still like very blitz heavy, but he would just charge after you and get reckless, and then he'd get clipped and he'd just panic, right? Like, you think about the Whitaker fight where he's just like stuck running in fast motion, like 2x speed right into his opponent. Even the Adesanya fight, like, he'd get rocked and just like think, oh, I got to clinch, and just sprint at his opponent. And I like to think that those tendencies have kind of slowed with him. The pros for Brunson here, I think he might be the best wrestler in this division. I know people mention like Marvin Vettori is a super high level grappler, and they both did bad things to Kevin Holland. It's funny you mentioned that fight because you go back and like Derek Brunson had control for 17 of the 25 minutes they fought, and he won, I mean, dominantly. I think it was 49-45 even on some cards. He had a 10-8 round. Like, it wasn't really competitive as a whole, but there were certainly some moments where you're like clenching your butt cheeks because it was like, is Derek gassing out? Like, is Kevin coming back right now? Is the tide turning? Despite how dominant it really was as a whole when we look back at it. And I think that Darren Till, he has good first level takedown defense. His takedown defense is 82%. He's not a guy who's easy to take down. I do think that Brunson has the wrestling to take him down at least once. And Brunson, I mean, people forget, like, he put Edmund in a world of trouble on the ground. It's a big underdog in that spot. Like, he's legit on top. And I know Darren Till's gotten up against guys like Cowboy, but if you go back and think about it, like, got 10-8'd by Nick Dalby back in the day. The Tyron Woodley fight got taken down, didn't get up, or it was the end of the round, and then he got submitted in the second round. Like, Tyron or Darren Till, he's not great off his back, and I think he's going to get put there once or twice. I do think that eventually Brunson will run into a counter shot. Darren Till is not high volume, but when he does throw, I mean, this guy had a seriously like competitive striking fight with Robert Whitaker as of last year. That's certainly a feather in the cap. Like, I do think that Till, as frustrating as he is, he's a really, really good, like, pure technical striker. And there's people who know way more about striking and the ins and outs of it than I do, and they all seem to think that Till is high level as well, so I trust their opinions. I think Till has a big advantage on the feet here. It comes to Brunson, get him down multiple times, and can he really carry that pace for 25 minutes? Because he's going to face more adversity and more difficulty in getting the takedowns than he did in the Kevin Holland fight. So I'll pick Darren Till here. I'm not laying the price tag. I almost bet fight to end inside the distance at -154. I know it's moved to -200, so I'm certainly not betting it now. But I even passed at that number just because I feel like Darren can be so frustrating where he doesn't let his hands go, and it just could be a staring contest, because I don't think that Derek is just going to like sprint into a right hand immediately, but I do think eventually, like on a takedown entry, something like that, Darren does catch him. I'll pick him. I think he wins by knockout. In a week where we had 13 or 14 fights, I'm not sure that I would be jamming in Darren Till into DFS lineups. In fact, I think Brunson would be an interesting underdog, but where we're at now, where we can afford so many of these favorites, and we have one 5-round fight and only 10 in general, and no one that we feel is like a super great underdog, or no one who has a super high ceiling, I'll likely get a lot of exposure to this fight. I'll likely play Till in single entry, but it's not a spot that normally I would be rushing to back someone, even though it's the main event. So that's all I have for the main event. John, we did it. That's 10 fights for UFC Vegas 36 going down this weekend at the Apex. If you have anything to add on the main event, any of the 10 fights we mentioned, DFS, all that good stuff, feel free to do so. And if not, take us out of here.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is, I'll say it again, on a 10-fight card, we're just looking to get leverage, especially in the main tournament on DraftKings. And that's definitely a way to do it, is to fade the main event or, pretty much just fade the main event. I was going to say take the other side, but I think Brunson will actually get a little bit of ownership as well. But yeah, I would say fade the main event and hope for a Darren Till decision would be the best outcome there if you are fading the main event. But like you, I would say like on a 10, say you're building 10 lineups, I'd probably get exposure to the main event in like 8 of them, maybe 7 of them if you're feeling a little risky. And then at least leave yourself a couple bullets to where, say Till wins a very low scoring decision. Well, now you're eliminating probably like 70 to 80% of the field, because everybody's going to have the main event on such a short fight card. So again, that's just another way to get unique and find leverage when it's a difficult card to do so. But that's it, guys. That's all I got this week. Wow. Can't talk tonight. This is UFC Vegas 36. All of our stuff will be on ftndaily.com, ftnbets.com. I'm John Kelly. That's Jonah Shiffman. This is the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network, saying goodbye and good luck, and we will see you guys next time.